Here's a myth that quietly wrecks leaders. If I just get the right strategy, everything will settle down. But the truth is, we're not living through a strategy problem. We're living through an adaptive challenge problem where the answers aren't in the deck, they're in the people. Today's guest is rooted in adaptive leadership, and he's here for the human side of leading through complexity, energy, integration, boundaries, and the realities C suite leaders don't say out loud, but absolutely live. Welcome back to Is Anything Real, the reality first leadership show where we test advice, publish the receipts, and ship what works under constraint. I'm Adam W. Barney, transition leadership coach, author, and host of this show. Today's guest is Max Martina, Seattle based, Boston Harvard ties, and part of a two-tier practice. First, Cambridge Leadership Associates, working with big, complex organizations. And then also the Knopfsinger Group, confidential advising with senior C-suite leaders. Max, welcome.
Adam, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
You got it. All right. Before we go deep, quick Boston callback. I'm in Dorchester, land of New Kids on the Block and Bobby Brown, and you've got Seattle grunge energy. So tell me, what's the most Boston leadership trait and the most Seattle leadership trait you've actually seen in the wild?
Oh, wow. That's okay. Good gotcha question. No, I like it. Seattle as a West Coast city is very much in keeping with West Coast energy. And I think it gets an appropriate reputation for being not only the mecca for grunge, but also, one of the VC sister cities beyond Silicon Valley that's really relaxed and casual. And so, we joke that when we show up to the office here in Seattle, if you have a clean t-shirt on and your fly a zip, then you're really dressed up. Whereas in Boston, that doesn't quite fly. Boston's it's not New York, but it's a little bit more old school. So I think executives have a bit, ironically, even though Seattle's the home of grunge, Boston executives have a bit more of a gritty edge. That's an anecdotal experience. And then probably Seattle execs are a little bit more whimsical, maybe.
I love it. All right. Here's where we're kind of going today. I think that the myth here is that complex change is solved by technical fixes. The truth being that most real problems are actually adaptive challenges. And the proof is what Max is going to bring here with the patterns he's seen at the C-suite level. Max, can you give us the myth in one sentence? What's the biggest lie leaders tell themselves when the world gets chaotic?
Well, there's probably a few, Adam, but great question. One is that they're a leader. And I know that sounds maybe controversial. Perhaps it's semantics, but I've even stopped using that word in my own vocabulary. He's a leader. She's a leader. They're a leader. Because if you really think about so many of the commonly misunderstood expectations of what leadership really is, first and foremost, we understand it as a practice, as a set of behaviors, right? So if you're in a position of authority with the expectations of hundreds or thousands of employees staring up at you, you are only leading insofar as you are practicing leadership. And so you say, well, that's sounds kind of basic, but the reality is that not many of us can practice leadership 100% of our professional lives. Many of us are executing against really critical technical initiatives, right? And so a lot of the problems that we experience they're actually technical. A lot of them, if you get a flat tire on the roadside, you don't need a consultant to help you with that. You just need the baseline knowledge of how to fix a tire.
Right.
So those are great. I mean, those are important problems. Heart surgery would be one of those complex technical problems. But as you point out, a lot of the problems are either a mix of technical and adaptive or solely adaptive. And those problems are another tier of complexity and ambiguity, and they unfortunately defy quick fixes. So I think when executives go in thinking that I'm going to lead us through to the promised lands in this complex issue or narrative that we're forming here around the problem that we're facing, my gosh, it's a missed opportunity, because the nuance and requirement to delve across stakeholders and silos is very high. So missed opportunity there. Yeah, and those adaptive problems, they often take a lot of time to solve, right? Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
it's
and
complex.
I think Max, so the myth there is basically if I just think harder, uncertainty will stop being rude to me.
Yeah.
um,
Or if I plug in the right expertise, then we've got the problem solved.
right.
I mean, but how many times have you seen organizations do, a system retrofit, a new ERP system, and they think,
Sure.
oh, no problem, it's just a technical problem, and
Sure.
yet what they realize quite quickly is that uh, human behavior has to change throughout the organization. So you're
Right.
actually not just changing systems, you're changing the way humans behave in response to the system. So
Yeah.
that's the adaptive piece that we think about, right? Where does
Right.
human behavior need to change within the system and beyond the system? Yeah, and that's not
Well,
usually a one-off issue or fix.
that's actually Max a great way to describe it and define it like a human, not like a textbook. But what would you say a super common adaptive challenge that's been disguised as a technical project? What's an example of what that might look like here?
Yeah, well, I mentioned ERP, CRM systems, any kind of perceived technical internal change within a
Yep.
system or process is a common thing. And in fact, in those cases, a lot of organizations will deploy change management techniques,
Yep.
which are helpful and productive and can create project management timelines and effective movement. But you think about you think about beyond the system, even scaling enterprises. Scaling an organization is a complex technical issue. It's not, in most cases, it's not just simply about growing revenue,
Right.
right? It's about the adaptation that's required at the individual skill level as well as the organizational lens and even across silos. So we'll see
Yep.
this all the time as companies grow, that at some stage in their life, usually at multiple stages, 5 6 different moments in the company's history,
Yep.
the old behaviors no longer support where the organization is headed. And
Right.
this is why, statistically, if you look at the lifespan and longevity of CEOs that are startup founders, most of them don't make it past 50, 60 million in revenue.
Yep.
Well, I mean, most companies don't, but the ones that do, those startup founders tend to not have the capacity to adapt and develop the new skill set to evolve into the new way
Right.
of being. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, very common.
Where do you see leaders there tend to get stuck? Is it ego? Is it fear? Is it incentives? Is it exhaustion?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, if you think about where you might get stuck when you brush your teeth at night, you think, well, I'm not stuck. But if something happens to your dominant hand, right? If you break your wrist, you're going to be forced to use your non-dominant hand. So
Mm,
why am I bringing that up? Well, it's a simple metaphor, because I think if we look at, we have to have a lot of compassion and empathy for these executives who are doing complex work, and most
right.
of us don't really appreciate that. But if we can do that, then what we realize is that at some point the organization metaphorically forces us to brush our teeth with our non-dominant hand. And
Yep.
so when executives get stuck, they either don't see that, right? Now I need to switch behavior and do something different, or
Right.
they see it and they say, I don't need to do that because what I've done has always worked in the past.
Right.
So it's both an error of metacognition or reflexive consciousness,
Yep.
and I think equally an inability for individuals to actually hone and cultivate the new skill set or behavioral requirement to move forward.
Yeah.
And so that twofold issue is what, I mean, that really prevents all of us from learning, right? And yeah,
True
not just
story.
executives. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see it, Max. That adaptive leadership isn't about having the answer; it's about holding the room while the answer gets built.
I love that. That's a beautiful way to say that. I think so. What you've called out there is the holding environment. How important it is for executives to design a space where people can learn,
Right.
right? And so much about adaptive leadership is really, can individuals and teams and orgs create the contextual awareness, the container, the holding environment, to allow for creation, to allow for innovation, to allow for spaces where people can learn. I mean, if you think about high performance teams throughout history, right? High performance, as Linconi calls it, really stem from trust. But trust, if you look beyond trust, comes from competence, right? So
Right.
competence leads to trust, which leads to high performance. Well, what creates competence? What creates competence is failure and learning. And so here we are in organizations wanting high performance teams. And
Yep.
what we're saying is to get the competence you need to create the trust, you have to fail to learn. So these things are diametrically opposed, right? It's
Right.
it's an irony, because high performing teams and organizations do allow individuals and teams to fail forward.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
and that's where we aligned on something that I absolutely love, and it's that idea that innovation is born from restriction, right?
Yes.
People
Yes.
don't reinvent until they have to. And I love how you're getting into what's real there, and why constraints create progress. Actually, I
Very
think
much so.
it comes down to, constraints force prioritization or reprioritization.
Yes.
They force
Yes.
iteration, those learning loops. They expose legacy assumptions.
Yeah.
Whereas comfort, fuels drifting, and pressure actually fuels the need to make a decision.
Yeah.
What,
Well
what's
said.
what's
Go.
a constraint leaders should intentionally impose to help get unstuck, though?
Well, that's a great question. So I think there's a nuanced answer to that, because it would be nice to say here's the top 3 list, but the reality is that every executive, every situation is very different. Even competing marketing companies or
Yep.
competing sales or SaaS companies, they will have very unique environments, very unique customer bases, even within product tech stacks. There'll be different areas of emphasis. So I
Yep.
think what you've hit on there, it's hard to provide a road answer, but what I will say is that we think a lot about this idea of what we would call the zone of productive disequilibrium, which sounds like big fancy words, right? But it's the space where all real growth happens. And you can think about that individually, like if you go to the gym, right? Am I getting fitter?
Yep.
To do that requires putting yourself in a space where it is uncomfortable, where you have to sweat, where physiologically, you actually have to work to tear muscle fibers or build new capacity. So it's that place, and at a team and organizational level, where you're actually under some level of disequilibrium, constraint, and that can feel like stress and tension. The problem with that space is that every individual is different, right? So some people can tolerate extraordinary amounts of stress and be extremely productive. Some people cannot. And so when we manage and lead teams, part of that requirement is to assess and understand the container, but also the capacity of the teams that we're working with. And so, I often think about leadership as a lever, and it's really a lever about applying heat, or a knob, like in a kitchen, right? And so part of the leader's job, I say leader, the executive job, the executive who's practicing leadership, it's their job to modulate the heat. And so they need a really sensitive, sort of a good radar to sense the level of the heat, and also to sense the level of capacity and production that's being generated from the heat, right? Turn the stove too high and you're going to burn your eggs. Too low and it'll take forever to cook. So how do we modulate the heat? And so I think that is maybe an overarching theme. And some of those modulations, going along here, but some of those modulations are simple things like timetables, expectations, modulating quality and quality requirements, team constraints, budget constraints. These could be real or sometimes imagined, but they're all relevant. They're all relevant to creating effective output in organizations.
That's a fascinating way to sort of thread that needle in executive leadership, where maybe constraint can get confused with suffering.
Yes.
But how, from your perspective and what you do there in both of the roles that you hold, do you see it's possible for a leader to avoid burning the candle 360 degrees, and maintaining that culture while still moving fast?
Yeah, gosh, this is so back to the productive zone of disequilibrium. I think in for-profit enterprises, oftentimes organizations run too hot, and they burn people out. They burn themselves out. I think the opposite is true in the public sector. When we work with government or entities, the heat is too low, and so real work doesn't get done. It doesn't get pushed forward. So yeah, I think there's a real risk across the board of burnout. I think there's a real risk of overburdening the systems, people, and processes that you have in front of you to actually get real work done. And so the experimental process of what is required from a leadership lens means that to lead effectively, we're not consulting a manual. We're experimenting assessing, intervening, and attempting new things every single day. And if we have that mindset, Adam, I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this, but if we have that mindset, then not only are we trying new approaches to effective leadership, but we're actually learning from what we've tried. And so we actually gather enormous amounts of data about the system that we're operating in. And in that context, can make better decisions. So the ones that are the executives that are really attentive and have a very honed radar around the dynamic external and intrinsic pressures of the system. I say system, the company in this case. The ones that do, gosh, they're wildly effective. They're much more effective, and they have a tendency to also be able to observe their own limitations and frustrations and challenges, which is a part of staying alive to lead. Yeah,
that's a big piece of it. And I mean, I want to quickly touch on something that executives and leaders tend to not put on their strategy slides, but it's energy. And by that, I mean personal energy, right? Because one of the few things that levels every single human on this planet is that we all only get 24 hours in the day to get done what we need to get done. And in that, you mentioned something I loved, the old don't mix files advice, having a work drawer, a family drawer, a hobby drawer. And that's absolutely adorable as in a sort of Pleasantville way of thinking, but it's impossible now.
Yeah, I totally agree.
What do you see real is real there? Is it balance or is it integration?
Yeah, it's the latter word. I mean, the file drawer metaphor that was shared with me by my mentor is really, I think, a mechanistic 1950s, 1960s model, from the Mad Men world, where we have our professional lives and it's siphoned off from the family life, which is siphoned off from our rest and relaxation or repose. But as you said, that model doesn't work in a hyper-connected future and present where technology is always on. The only way to move forward in this new dynamic, particularly with AI emerging as a powerful shaper of futures, is to integrate. And so what does integration mean? Well, integration comes from the word integrate, and integrate has at its root integrity, right? And so integrity, by definition, if we think more along the lines of metallurgy, I think is a much more valuable idea. Sure. If you have steel that has integrity, right, it holds an edge. It can bend but not warp, right? It doesn't shatter. Right. And so in the same way, I think executives today need to have that kind of integrity that allows them to integrate. Not honesty and ethics, although that's relevant. It's the kind of fortitude and resilience that enables them to, there are times you have to take calls during maybe a personal retreat or some quiet time that you're dealing with. But there's also some time in work where you're going to have to manage, some home life issues that surface. So this integration is really about discernment. It's really about how do I understand how and when I need to intervene to create positive outcomes without destroying my own energy, right? And so a lot of executives, they ultimately move through this place of busy lives and then feel to some extent trapped or victimized by their context and container. And that's unfortunately not discernment. Right. That's being used by the system, right? So to integrate, we have to balance is I think a 4-letter word. Unfortunately, I don't like it because I don't think it's real.
I don't think it's real either. Yeah.
Whatever we choose to focus on, by definition, we're impoverishing something else. Right. So what are we choosing, right? And that's an active process, as I'm sure you've seen. Yeah.
Right. Well, and I mean, there's also that cost of context switching, right? And that doesn't help leaders or executives manage their own nervous system, which should be a priority there.
Well said.
I think it's also tough for leaders to protect their team energy, maybe without being viewed as being soft, but that's important. But also I would ground this all in the fact that C-suite executives and founders don't run out of time first. They run out of usable energy. And I think that's a great starting point for where what I like to call energy debt starts to show up in executive behavior, and regaining that capacity is critical.
Well, I have 3 kids, as we might have discussed earlier, and my youngest just turned 13. So I have 3 teenagers in the house. And when they were little, there's this book about filling your love bucket, which sounds so silly, but as a metaphor, maybe parents out there have heard this book. It's kind of the same thing for executives, right? It's are you are you, as the most valuable commodity or resource that you have access to, it is your own storehouse of energy. So
Yeah.
that idea of, and we've sort of hinted at this, but the power of the idea of self-care, it is not a touchy-feely thing.
Yeah.
Right. It's not something that, we just give lip service to. It is actually a requirement for senior executives operating at a high performance level. And it would be no different than a high performance athlete, showing up to the track meet, half an hour late, not having stretched, not having slept, right? Going out binge drinking the night before. They wouldn't do that because they're guarding and protecting that reserve, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as executives, we want to be attentive to that too. The problem is, in an executive landscape, we're always on.
Right.
Everyone sees us all the time. When you're a track superstar athlete, you're running for 10 seconds if you're the 100-meter sprinter, right? So it's a little different in terms of how we deploy that energy.
Well, but I love that comparison here, because I think people think that the C-suite has fewer problems. But the truth is, it's just higher stakes versions of the same human problems that we all face.
I love that. I mean, in organizational life, we think of one idea here, maybe a new idea, but that individuals and organizations go through stages. Yeah. And at the earliest stages of development, one of the things that we notice is that, particularly if you think about when you started your first job, or anyone out there listening who's new in their careers, the goal is execution and performance. It's about deploying expertise and skill sets in a way where you can achieve, right?
Yep.
The irony is, in later stages of organizational life, we're expected to actually tolerate and handle all of the stresses and cares of other people. So we think of the paradox of leadership as maybe early stage, functionally less stress because you're only in charge of what's in front of you, right? And you get more kudos and rewards. Oftentimes the sales guys are the most highly compensated in organizations.
Totally.
And then if you're managing or leading, right, you have more stress and you get fewer rewards in terms of psychological kudos. So there's this paradox of leadership that happens in late stage enterprises and with high level executives that very few people have empathy for. Very few people have empathy for. They do not understand the pains and pressures of the executive. And even if they think they do, they probably don't.
Right.
So it's hard place to be, right? As an executive.
Well, and people who aren't in that C-suite level probably think that proof is just the idea, but really proof is the behavior change that holds when pressure spikes.
Love it. Yeah, well said. I mean, this work for a lot of, if you have executive coaches out there, I think this might be familiar, but this idea that, providing advice is not really the focus of what we do from an advisory lens. The focus of what we do is helping someone actively brush their teeth with their non-dominant hand, which is fundamentally behavioral, right? So what we want to look for is behavioral change in the system and individual. And I'll have an executive, maybe we've been talking for a little while, that shows up to my office and they'll say, I did this a little differently. I tried this. I get really excited because I understand the foundations of behavior change being connected to awareness and minute behavioral changes and adjustments. And when I hear that, I think, wow, we're onto something. This is massive, right? For actually impacting wholesale change. Yeah.
It doesn't need to be big. And I actually think about it, as we were talking, Max, I was thinking about maybe one move, something that listeners could run this week. And I'm thinking something like the adaptive challenge audit, right? It should take 10 minutes, write down the hardest thing you're facing right now, then answer a few quick questions. One, is it technical or is it adaptive? If it is adaptive, what behavior has to change? It could be yours or the team's.
Yeah, great.
Maybe what loss is being avoided? Is it status, certainty, control, identity? And then maybe one tiny experiment you can run in 7 days to learn your way forward. But the kicker being, what are you tolerating in that's draining your energy? Circle one tolerance, remove it this week.
Great.
What's one tolerance you see C-suite leaders normalize that's quietly killing them, though?
Yeah, it depends on the executive, but I think, unfortunately, executives err on the side of not being declarative enough. So that manifests, in my words, maybe as being too soft and not driving sufficient accountability. This is less true at public corporations with C-suite, but it can be true. Most people want to, they over-index on the safe environment for their employees. And so the problem with that is that you're actually not focused on the work. You're focused on employee satisfaction. And while that's important to doing the work, the relentless focus has to be on what is the actual work, right? And if we can orient people to that, oh my gosh, then we can actually get buy-in because we connect with a deeper sense of purpose at the organizational level. Yeah, I think that's great. I love the idea of an audit. You know, and so much of that is about who are the stakeholders in this issue, and most of us don't think beyond our own purview. There are a lot of stakeholders in these complex issues that we often don't consider.
That is extremely true. Well, you know, Max, in C-suite leadership and leadership just in general, after everything we just kind of covered, is anything real?
Yeah, the output of organizations doing extraordinary work is obviously real. You know, and I think when you work backwards from what we aspire to create as executives, and to use the words leader, which is a semantic issue that I have with that, but to use that, is anything real? Yeah, when we push beyond the results of what we're expecting and seeing, then you actually see the heart and the soul and the purpose that enables this output to exist and flourish. And so I think that's real, because without that, you know, the human creative mind and the enterprising results that we can create extraordinary things, it doesn't happen. So got to come from somewhere. So I think it's real. Yeah, I know it's real.
I mean, through that, you know, I think what's real is the hard problems don't need better decks, right?
Good.
They need better behavior, boundaries, and bravery.
Great. Bravery. I love that. Courage, right? Yeah. We think a lot about courage. Courage is not doing, we know that courage is about doing something that you're scared of doing, right? It's not about having no fear. So yeah, leadership exists in that space where we're at the liminal, right? Where we're actually doing what we don't know will lead to results.
That's magical.
And that's risky, very risky.
It's super risky. You know, Max, where can people find you and Cambridge Leadership Associates, and maybe not find the Knopfsinger Group, and what kind of leaders should reach out?
That's great, Adam. Thanks. Cambridge Leadership Associates, check out our website, cambridge-leadership.com. We were founded in Boston out of Harvard. We now live and work in Seattle, most of us. We have an international crew. For those that are thinking about executive advising, our separate platform is knopfsingergroup.com. And I think the platform is a little bit different in the sense that we tend to work with larger organizations and training on the CLA side, and senior level executives on the Knopfsinger side. So depending on who you are and if it would be helpful, happy to have a conversation. And thanks.
Oh my gosh. And we'll, of course, link to that in the show notes below. But for our listeners, if this episode hit you, send it to one leader who keeps trying to solve an adaptive challenge with another spreadsheet. You know, and if you're leading through transition where what got you here won't get you there, there's a 20-minute foundational call with me linked in the show notes below as well. No pitch, just reality in the next move. But until next time, proof over performance and ship what works. But Max, thank you.
Adam, what a pleasure. Love the questions. Love being with you. Thanks a lot.
If this episode of Is Anything Real resonated, you're probably at a moment where the old playbook isn't holding anymore. I work with transitioning founders and executives to install operating rhythms that hold under pressure. Not motivation, not hype. I've spent over 20 years inside high-pressure environments and worked with over 300 leaders through moments where clarity mattered more than speed. If you want clarity you can actually rely on, book a foundation call at adamwbarney.com. Clarity over chaos, always.